how's it going? I'm Stacy from Bricks and Blooms, and welcome back to my home and garden. For those of you that are new here, I live and grow expansive gardens here in New Jersey, Zone 6B. And while I usually chat a lot about growing flowers, we've been having an issue with a blue heron lately in our koi ponds, and so I thought today would be a great time to talk about ways to protect your koi pond from predators and tell you a little bit about what happened here and what we've done to try and protect our fish. So I'm going to give you a bunch of ideas and share my experiences with them because we've pretty much tried everything with one blue heron in particular, and I definitely have an opinion as to what works and what doesn't. You ready to get started? Let's talk about the koi pond. So just to give you a little background, we moved here in 2021 and are still pretty new to being pond owners. We actually have two here, one that's really large in the front yard, and then we have a second one in the backyard that's not as deep, a little bit smaller, so it can't have as many fish. But it's really protected. It's got a lot of tree canopies as well as a Japanese maple and an elderberry that kind of help conceal it. So it is a little more protected from wildlife than the other pond. Over the last few years, we've been stocking both ponds with fish. So in the front pond, we added shibunkin goldfish and some koi, but the koi keep getting picked off. And we only have koi in the back. That pond is a little more shallow. It's nestled under trees, like I just explained, and we can only really fit a few back there. So we've had a family of 5 that is supposed to represent my husband, Chris, and my 3 daughters, Mackenzie, Shayna, and Tori, and myself. Can't forget about me. So anyway, so last year, a blue heron got to 2 of our fish in the back pond. I know it got some in the front, but it definitely got 2 in the backyard pond at the end of the season, just before it got chilly, and shortly thereafter, the other 3 died. We were devastated. We were so upset about this. We had them for almost 2 seasons, and you know, you really get to know your fish. They're really friendly. They love to see you, and I have 2 Labradors, and they love their food. And I have to say, koi fish are just like my dogs. They are ready to eat. When they see that food coming, they scramble and they're ready to go. So losing them last year was really, really upsetting. So when spring came along, we were determined to restock that pond, and we bought 5 new fish for Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day weekend. I was really excited about it, and they were doing great. We added pond plants. They really love that. And for the first time, I'd never done pond gardening before, and we added some water lilies, hyacinths, papyrus, pickerel, and a couple other goodies. Atlantis Water Gardens helped us kind of get the pond going, and now I'm all about pond gardening too, by the way. But anyway, when we put the pond plants in, those fish loved it. They loved having that vegetation in the water. Which brings me to what happened recently, because a blue heron raided our backyard pond overnight and the fish were gone. So no fish. It was a strange day too, because I was outside doing some things, and when I came to the backyard, I noticed the fish acting a little bit funny. They were a little more skittish than normal, and I thought maybe it was because there was a storm rolling in. I heard some thunder. I was like, maybe they're getting upset. But then the next morning, I didn't see any fish. I didn't see any fish when I went out to feed them. They always come out for me. I was letting the dogs out, and all of a sudden, wouldn't you know, that blue heron landed right on the roof of one of our sheds in the backyard and was just looking at me like, thanks for the meal. So despite the pond being covered by foliage and trees, the heron still found its way back there. I'll share more about this story because it's a doozy. It's a doozy. I mean, so many ups and downs with the fish and the bird, and but anyway, we'll briefly chat about ways to protect your koi pond from predators like raccoons, herons, things like that, cats, and I'll share my experiences with them and tell you what I think of each. So many will say that one of the most effective methods to determine predators from going to your pond like a blue heron is to place a heron decoy near your pond and move it around regularly to maintain the effectiveness. But I'm here to tell you that that is a bust. It's a total bust. When I chased the heron away from our back pond that morning, when I saw it on the roof line of the shed, it actually flew to the front yard pond, and my husband ran outside to kind of make sure it wasn't snacking on those fish. And when he ran out there, would you believe that heron was sitting right next to the decoy on the bridge, because we had just moved it. We had just moved the decoy to the railing on the bridge. And there it was, sitting there with the decoy heron like they were on a date. Now, I've heard coyote decoy can be effective, and I considered doing that with coyote urine. But after the experience we just had with the heron kind of figuring things out, I don't know that that would really work with a really persistent bird. Maybe initially it might keep them away because they might fly in and maybe smell the urine or fly by and think they see a coyote. But if you've got a heron that found your pond, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it will work. So another option that you can try are motion activated sprinklers. They can also be a great deterrent. They startle herons with a sudden burst of water, and that should keep them away from your pond. Now, we didn't do this because I've got 2 dogs, and if you've got dogs and kids, it may be tough to kind of keep that going if you frequent that area. The other thing is I do believe that they can learn that there's a water thing there, and it's not going to startle them if they're really persistent and want to get into your pond. So I think maybe it's a great deterrent initially to keep them away, but I don't know if it's a great long-term solution for keeping them out of your pond. So another way to keep predators like herons away from your pond is to use reflective objects like CDs or tape or something like that, and hang it around the pond to create like sudden flashes of light that would deter them. Now, I think this might work initially as well. But again, I think if you have a persistent heron in particular that wants to get into your pond, I think it will learn that it's not something they need to fear, and they will eventually kind of work through it and hunt your fish. And I say this because a persistent heron will literally stalk your pond. This heron that we have here, he is stalking my pond. He's stalking my pond because as soon as we go in the house, he visits. So he is not only watching the pond, he's watching us. So I think they will learn and figure their way around these things if they really want to get into your pond. I'm finding that they're very, very smart. To me, the best method is really to net your pond to physically prevent the herons and even other predators like raccoons and cats and things like that from accessing the water. A sturdy net elevated above the surface can be really, really effective. But I would say that even thinking that through, when you think about a blue heron, think about their really long beak, because if they can still reach into the pond and get their beak through the netting, whether they can grab that fish or not, they will not care. They will kill the fish and you'll have a dead fish under the netting. So I strongly suggest you have some sort of raised netting, not one that's flat on the pond, and you kind of think about how you're keeping them away from the netting altogether, because again, their beaks are long, and again, I will share my story. We've learned the hard way just how serious these birds are. I also want to add that you should provide hiding places for your fish with like tunnels and caves, and even pond plants can help give them places to hide if a predator comes by. Like I mentioned earlier, we added lily pads and hyacinths and papyrus and pickerel and all kinds of plants, and it really does give the fish a little bit more cover as opposed to just having an open pond with no vegetation whatsoever. So we've really had the craziest experience recently with our pond fish and a blue heron that continues as I'm recording this video. So, but I think we're onto something with how we are protecting our fish, at least in the back now. And so I'm going to share with you the saga, how it unfolded, everything that happened, the miracles, the losses, because we just go up and down with this story. So are you ready? You ready? Here's my story. A couple weeks ago, I told you that I noticed the fish acting a little skittish, and then the next morning I noticed they didn't come out, yada, yada, yada. So the blue heron chased him out. He was hanging out with a decoy in the front pond after that. Eye roll. And then my husband and I were we were devastated because we saw no fish in the pond. After that happened, my husband came back and we looked through the pond and we didn't see any fish. So we thought that the heron got all the fish because we didn't see any. They're all gone. Fish, all gone. So we had 5 fish that we just bought on Mother's Day after losing the other 5 in the fall, and they were all gone. So that was on, I want to say, a Wednesday. We were really upset about it. I mean, we really loved the new fish that we had. I mean, I love the old fish, but the new fish had gotten so big and they were so beautiful. And, you know, they become like a little member of your family. So we were really upset about this. So anyway, we decided that we were going to go and get more fish. Getting more fish, and we're going to net the pond. No brainer. Now, really, in hindsight, we should have netted the pond earlier. I mistakenly thought, and this is definitely on me, I mistakenly thought that because the heron hadn't been visiting our pond until the leaves started falling, that we had a little bit more cover there for them, so we didn't need to net it right away, because we noticed the heron coming like later in the season. So I said to Chris, why don't we just net it like in August? Like, we'll just net it, you know, sometime in August, like towards the end when the leaves start coming down and we know fall is like, you know, imminently coming. And so that was really our plan. And that did not matter. The heron, I guess, it remembered the pond or saw the pond. I don't know, but it came into my backyard and it ate my fish. So we decided we were going to go buy more fish, restock the pond, because we really enjoy having that life back there. I mean, there's just something about having fish in a pond and be able to watch them, say good morning and feed them. That's just really fun this time of year. And I don't know, we really enjoy it. So we definitely wanted to restock the pond. So we went to the store, we went to Atlantis Water Gardens, and they were having a Christmas in July sale. So because they were having a Christmas in July sale, we decided to get, how many? I think we got 6 fish. Yeah, we got 6 fish. So we figured one would represent me, my husband, my 3 girls, and my 1 daughter has had a boyfriend for like 5 years now. So we said, hey, we'll get one for Clay too. So this time we got one for Clay too, and we brought them home and we got right to work. We put the bag in the water to let the fish acclimate, and my husband and Clay started getting the netting together to put over the pond. We got the fish acclimated, we released them in the pond, we got the netting on, and my husband and I were sitting there and we were watching the pond and we were like really happy about our fish and how lovely it was to have fish in the pond again. And suddenly my husband said, you know, I don't remember that one fish looking so blue in the store. And I looked at the fish that he was talking about and I was like, it didn't. I said, you know, maybe it's the lighting, maybe like the sunlight or something in the water like changes the way, you know, the fish looks. So then he goes, you know what? That fish looks a lot like Tori's old fish. Did we get a fish that looks like Tori's fish? And I was like, no. And then he starts counting and I noticed the first fish that had the blue was my daughter Shayna's fish. So then we started counting the fish and we saw that we had 10 fish. So we had 10 fish. So, because we bought 6, we had 5 before, but we definitely lost 1. We lost the really big white one. Haven't seen that one since. So these fish must have been hiding really well after it took their leader, because that white fish was like their leader. They followed him around everywhere. And they must have decided that when they saw all these other fish that it must be safe, they could come out now, and they were like so happy. And so were we. We were really happy that they were there, and we were really like, it was a miracle, you know, it's like a miracle. So, but now we have 10 fish in the back pond that's really small, and I know that it can't ultimately house that many fish, and so we're probably gonna have to figure out that at some point, yada, yada, yada. But anyway, life is good, right? So now we went from having 5 fish to having no fish to having 6 fish to having 10 fish. It was amazing. So a couple days go by, and you know, we're really happy with our setup. We hadn't seen the heron. We really thought we had this under control. And then Chris and I left for a trip to Vermont last Friday. So last Friday, we're driving up to Vermont, and my youngest calls us and says, I just saw the heron. He just flew up past my window. We were like, run downstairs, check on the fish. You got to check on them right now. Check, 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 check. So she goes downstairs. She did not see anything. She didn't see any dead fish. She didn't see anything wrong with the netting. And so she was like, maybe he saw the netting and he left. And so we were like, okay, maybe that's what happened. So we were actually in Vermont. We were going to celebrate our anniversary. We were going to go on the lake and go thrifting and do all that fun stuff. And so anyway, we went out to dinner. We're in the middle of dinner, and we get a call from Tori to tell us that one of the fish was dead in the pond. So one of the fish had been pierced by the heron, and he couldn't get it out, obviously, because the netting was there. So we just had a dead fish in the pond. So we immediately told Tori and Clay, get the dead fish out, make sure it's dead, get the fish out of the pond, and get all kinds of stuff in storage and make like a barrier. So they took all of my green garden stakes and my snow stakes that we put in the ground for the guys that clean the snow off our driveway, and they made a fortress in and around the back pond to hopefully keep the heron out, which I thought was brilliant. They had everything kind of crisscrossing, and they found like some, it was almost like cattle panel netting or that they put around it too, so it couldn't like walk through, and it was brilliant. I thought it was really good. When we came home, we tweaked it a little bit, but the fish had been fine, and they didn't have a problem since. Now, I will say this. So we had gone up on Friday, fish died Friday night. Tori and Clay hung out by that pond almost all weekend long, and on Sunday, they were out there like the whole time. And when they went inside to eat, the bird came and sat like on the stone wall next to the steps in the Zen garden. So it was watching. It was watching. And so we turned talk radio on. That's another thing you could try. Talk radio. Talk radio, music. It might think people are out there, not want to come. All right, so we put a radio on out there. And when we came home, we kind of tweaked their setup a little bit. My husband had plans to build an enclosure, but you know, it was like Sunday night, so he probably wasn't going to get to it until the following weekend. So that was kind of our plan. Well, our plan was quickly changed when on Monday, I was sitting in the family room, which sits right behind that back pond. And all of a sudden, I heard the things knocking around. I heard all the garden stakes knocking around. That bird was literally inside the fencing that we built, and it was getting ready to fish and hunt that pond. So I like dove out of my chair. I almost tripped, and I almost fell. I actually almost hurt myself because I think luckily I caught myself. But I started running, and I ran outside, and I just started screaming at the bird. I was like screaming at it. And so it got really scared. It scrambled. It flew up to the wall under our tree, and it flew out. So that night, my husband went to Home Depot. He bought some supplies, and he started building the enclosure the next day. So while he was gone, I didn't want the heron coming back, and obviously I couldn't sit at the pond for the next, 24/7. So I took my trellis netting that I used to stake my plants with, and I created almost like a netting barrier so he couldn't fly in over the pond with it until my husband could get to building this enclosure. So anyway, so my husband went and bought the supplies, and then on Tuesday, he actually built the enclosure. So he built the enclosure, and I'm going to show you what he did.
All right, we've been fighting this heron off to keep it away from our koi fish, and this is what everyone came up with to try to keep it out. It's been attacking every day, trying to get in. Keep on adding and adding and adding to this fortress. I am going to get rid of this fortress and put some conduit. I'm going to clean this thing up. I'm going to try to build a better mouse trap, or bird trap, should I say. So I'm going to try to take that conduit and bring it into that black netting and just have the black netting and the flexible conduit with a couple of joints, and we're going to get rid of all of this ugly, unsightly, but safe looking barricade. We took the gray electric conduit, spray painted it flat black, and then put one rib across from rock to rock, another one on this side, and then we put one long ways, and then we zip tied them together, and now we're going to put on the net.
All right, so now we've got the enclosure built. In my opinion, because I know the blue heron was able to pierce my fish with just netting over the top of the pond, I thought we needed a little bit more. So I grabbed scat mats that I had here. I ordered a few extra to put on the outside of the pond so the bird couldn't like stand outside the pond. And in addition to that, we also made like this pseudo fencing using green garden stakes and fishing line as like another line of defense. So my thinking was we build this like fencing outside of the pond, we have scat mats on the ground, and then we have this pond enclosure, and hopefully the bird won't be able to get to them. So we did that, and I will tell you that the bird has been back, and it did go back there because we were out one morning. My other daughter was home, and she said, "Hey, I just saw the blue heron fly past my window." Luckily, I was almost home. So I jumped out of the car, I ran to the backyard, literally sprinted, and I noticed the fishing line was all messed up, and you could tell, like it must have tried to walk in to kind of approach and hunt. So that was another way that we are trying to prevent the bird from getting in the pond. So we have like a three-prong method, and we just added a Ring doorbell back there so that if there's motion in the pond, I can come on the speaker and be like, "Hey, get out of there." Hopefully that'll work. But as of now, my fish are still intact. We did lose two others after the one was killed. I think from stress. I think because we, changed their environment, bringing them home, and then they were basically terrorized by this bird. I just think they didn't survive. And we're down to 7 fish. So I think we might be onto something with our setup right now. And I know it looks like a lot, and you're probably saying, well, why even bother having fish? You can't have fish. I mean, we want to have fish back there. And at least until this heron decides to find another path, this is just what we're doing to protect the fish. And hopefully we'll be able to just live with an enclosure moving forward at some point. I may keep the scat mats though. I feel like that's kind of effective. We actually have one in the lower part of the waterfall, and I have a few placed around the pond just for extra measure because, I mean, this bird is smart. This bird is smart. And so going back to all the different methods, like I said, a lot of them would work maybe with an initial deterrent. But if you've got a bird like this one that's stalking your pond, waiting for you to go in the house, really wants to get to your fish and will pretty much stop at nothing to get to it, it's pretty much going to stop at nothing to get to them. So you really got to like think outside the box. maybe this method isn't for everyone. I don't recommend, staging your pond like this if you want the aesthetic of a beautiful pond. But if you want to save your fish, you might have to you might have to go this far. So at the end of the day, we've built a pond enclosure. I've got scat mats. We did a fishing line fence and a Ring doorbell. Oh, and before some of you leave me mean comments about, how it's dangerous for fishing line and it's going to harm the fish, the only place the fishing line is around the perimeter of the front part of my pond where the bird was fishing. And it's there because we didn't want to damage the pond liner, and I don't want the bird just walking in and approaching the pond. I want to keep them away so we can't fish through the netting. Works for us. So if it works long term, I'll have to do an update on this one, but this is where we are with it. But just to kind of give you an idea of how persistent wildlife can actually be. So at the end of the day, protecting your koi pond from herons and other wildlife, it requires a combination of methods and just regular monitoring. And what works for me may not work for you. What works for you may not work for me, but it's really good to kind of have all of these thoughts and ideas in your arsenal so that you can try them in your own pond garden and hopefully keep your fish alive. And that's it, you guys. Thanks so much for joining me in the gardens today. I'm Stacy from Bricks and Blooms. Enjoy a beautiful day.